Hello, and welcome to our Community Risk Reduction Week podcast. Today, I'm joined by Director Mike Morgan of the Colorado Division of Fire Prevention Control, or DFPC. Good morning, Director Morgan.
Good morning, Chuck. Thanks for having me here today. I appreciate it.
Thank you. We're also joined by Rebecca Clark, the Board President of the Colorado Risk Reduction Network, or CRRN, and she is with Wizard Severance Fire Protection District.
Good morning, Chuck. Thanks for having me.
Good morning, Rebecca. Thank you for coming. We're also joined by Stephen Parker, the Fire Marshal for Arvada Fire Department and President of the Fire Marshals Association of Colorado, also called FMAC.
Good morning. I'm happy to be here. Thanks.
Thank you, Stephen. We're joined also by Sasha Story, the Secretary for CRRN, and she's with North Metro Fire Protection District. Good morning, Sasha.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. And we're joined by Brad White, Chief of the Grand Fire Protection District in Granby, Colorado.
Good morning, Chuck. Thanks for having us on.
Thank you, Brad, for coming. And we're also joined by Chris Burnett. He's the Chief of the Fire and Life Safety Section at DFPC.
Good morning, Chuck. Thanks for having us on.
Thank you. And I am Chuck Altvater. I'm the Professional Development Unit Chief here at DFPC. And we're going to jump right into our conversation this morning about the community risk reduction cycle. And I'd like to ask Director Morgan to start us off by telling us a little bit about why community risk reduction is important and the genesis of it. And Director Morgan?
Thanks, Chuck. Again, thanks for allowing me to be here and for everybody for being here. I guess when I think about community risk reduction, and really think about it holistically, I think about the fire service as a whole. And we're a very traditional industry with some very good traditions and some traditions that are probably not as good. So, also a firm believer that in order to know where you're going, you must know where you've been. And when I think about community risk as a whole, I think of the America Burning Report that was originally published in 1973. And if there's anybody out there that's not familiar with a particular report, I would really highly encourage that you take a look at it and think about that as it relates to community risk reduction. So this report was originally published by the National Commission on Fire Prevention and Control, which is a presidential appointed commission formed in 1968. And they're formed to study and make recommendations on the fire problem in America. Now, these numbers are pretty astounding when you look at them, but at the time, America was experiencing about 12,000 civilian fatalities and about 300,000 civilian injuries annually. In addition, there was about 175 firefighter fatalities in the early 1970s annually. So to put that into perspective, with the growth and the change in the United States, if we left those numbers unchecked in today's population, that would mean we would be experiencing about 19,400 fatalities, about 485,000 injuries, and about 285 line of duty deaths annually in the United States. Now, obviously, we are not experiencing that. Instead, we're running about between 3,000 and 3,500 fatalities, usually around 20,000 civilian injuries, and knock on wood, take COVID out of the equation for 2020, but we're typically now finding ways to get the line of duty deaths below 100 annually. My first question as we talk about this and get into this conversation today is to say, is that just luck? And obviously it is not. It was leadership, intentional change, and really people putting their heads together on how do you make a change, a meaningful change, to drive those numbers down. So when we think about the age-old mission of the fire service of, to save lives and to protect property, we've made progress. We still have room to improve, and that is what we should be striving to do. And I applaud the community risk reduction folks and the community risk reduction network, because that's what you're driving us to and leading us to, and we appreciate that. And obviously, the America Burning Report was specific to the fire problem in the United States. When you look at the fire services and industry, the services we provide are much more expanded now than they were in the 70s. And I think if we take those same concepts and principles and apply that to what we're experiencing today, that we really have some opportunities to better fulfill the mission of saving lives and protecting property. So I just, again, I appreciate being here. I appreciate all you guys being here and making a positive change in the service that we all love and that we're striving to do a better job at.
All right. Thank you, Director Morgan. One thing I'm reminded of here is that community risk reduction is really a process, and that there are a lot of myths out there that we're still working to overcome about what it is. It's not just a new name for public education. It's not just something the fire marshal does. It's really something we as an industry, the entire fire service industry, participate in. And it's really a cycle. You know, we first identify the risks, prioritize them, develop strategies to mitigate those risks. Then we prepare a plan, we implement it, and we have to monitor and modify that plan as we go. Reminded of an incident we had here recently in Colorado where a fire apparatus rolled down a embankment, nearly 250 feet, and all four of the firefighters on board walked away with just minor injuries because that department had implemented a CRR program for their internal community where they identified the risks of vehicle collisions and rollovers and then prioritized that and then started enforcing a seatbelt strategy. If this were still back in the old days, the America burning days, those firefighters probably would not have been wearing seatbelts when that rig rolled over the cliff. So really, I think that's a great example of how this cycle works. And I'd like to go ahead and start talking about that cycle. And the first part, Rebecca, could you talk a little bit about how we identify and prioritize the risks through a community risk assessment?
Yes, thank you so much. I'd love to. So we all think about our grandmother's chicken noodle soup and how it is the best and it has the most amazing healing properties handed down through generations because it works, right? But how do we actually prove that? And alternatively, many of us in the fire service are great at saying that an area is high risk or an activity is high risk because we think we respond to that more often, or we feel it in our gut that that's the way it could be, but we struggle to pinpoint exactly why that is. And it's examples like these that have been at the heart of the community risk reduction conundrum. Knowing that our programs work and that we are serving our communities in the best ways that we can, but also needing to be able to prove it to both our citizens, our board of directors, our governing agencies, our cities. And so in the last 5 to 10 years, community risk reduction has really taken a huge leap forward as professionals in our field started to realize that we needed a way to demonstrate our fire prevention program's worth. This also just happens to be the name of a great class at the National Fire Academy. And it's this push towards quantifying our program's effectiveness that has led to a more data-driven community risk reduction and really the need to collect quality data. And I think it's really important to say there, quality data. Quality data is data that we have numbers for, we have results for. And then what we do with that data and how we apply it is one of the most important steps that we take in community risk reduction. And this is the creation and implementation of a community risk assessment. So a community risk assessment should really be the jumping off point for any community risk reduction program and probably the whole prevention division as a whole. The community risk assessment is really a snapshot of your community, lots of snapshots put together to make layers and build a good detailed picture about your community and the risks, the responses, all of that. And it needs to include layers like population density, ages, racial diversity, income, household size, basically all the information that you can get from the US Census. And then you couple that with building information, responses, natural resources and typography. And by combining all those snapshots together into this detailed picture, it provides you with a map of your community to use for your community risk reduction. And using the community risk assessment will highlight what those risks in your community are through quality data. So no longer will you be saying, oh, we know that we respond to that apartment building because, you know, it's it's this area. Instead, you can say, we respond to this building because it was built prior to this. This is the income in this family. This is single parent households, maybe. You have that data to prove it. If you're going to go before your city board and put your case forward for a partnership and you're asking them for money to install carbon monoxide alarms in XYZ subdivision because the houses are old, they may or may not go for that. But if you go in front of that same city board and you tell them the houses in XYZ subdivision were all built prior to 1998 when carbon monoxide alarms were not required in residential buildings. Also, from 2010 through 2020, we received 50 911 calls due to chirping carbon monoxide alarms that turned out to be expired. The community risk assessment will give you this type of information. It gives you these tools that you can then take out into your community, into your department, into your city, and you can show them these are the risks that we have because you have the information to back it up. If you say, oh, we have a fall problem with our seniors, okay, lots of people say they do, but if you say, according to our community risk assessment, we have a 74% dependent population, of which 40% is aged 65 and older. And these are the families and these are the seniors that are aging in place. And in this group, we've responded to this many lift assists, this many falls. And then you can tailor make your community risk programs to prevent that. You can say they're aging in place. They have rugs that aren't secured. So maybe part of your prevention program would be to get the double-sided sticky tape so that their rugs stay in place so they fall less. But that's what the community risk assessment is. It helps you determine all the risks. It takes all the little tiny pieces to put them together into a very detailed picture that should always be your jumping off point and your reference for any community risk reduction program that your division creates.
Okay. Rebecca, I heard you talking about the quality data. What are some of the best sources that agencies can use to acquire that good data? And how does the National Fire Incident Reporting System play into that?
So that is a great question. So, and I love that that's where the push is. It's not just data, but it's quality data. So for us, I know we pull all of our information, all of our incident reporting information. We pull all of that from our reporting system, but then we couple that with the U.S. Census data. We couple it with the building department, all of that to build this. I was really lucky that I was able to work with the National Fire Protection Association in their pilot program for community risk assessments. So I was great because I got to give them all of our data and they built me a community risk assessment that then I was able to use and bring to my fire chief and the city and all my different stakeholders and say, hey, here's what our problems are. But quality data. So for us, we track everything that we do now, not just our emergency responses, but all of our calls for service. So our smoke alarm installs, our carbon monoxides, any contact we have with the public, we're tracking as well, so that we can really have that data to show. In 2020, we reached 8,906 people. And our call volume, maybe did this. And so being able to show that data of what you did, because then hopefully you can find that correlation and that causation in that data and use it to show this is why we need this program. This is why we need to reach this group.
Very good. Thank you, Rebecca. As we get into the CRR cycle, the next point in there is developing strategies and tactics. And this is what most people hear of as the 5 E's of CRR. And those are education, engineering, enforcement, economic incentives, and emergency response. Sasha, can you tell us a little bit about how an education strategy works within the 5 E's and how someone might go about developing a education strategy for community risk reduction?
Sure. Thank you, Chuck. So as Rebecca kind of stated, we have to start with that community risk assessment to find out what we're looking at, to find out what the problems are, to find out where we need to start the education and what we need to educate about. In the CRR process of preventing the occurrence of fire, injury, and property loss, education is the foundation. But if you're educating a population about a problem that they're not having, they're not going to be able to apply it. So that's where taking what Rebecca talked about, that assessment, and truly applying it to your educational strategy. At the core of education in CRR is teaching the community about the risk issues they have and how to prevent those. The education is to help enlighten and empower them, which I think are two extra E's we could add into the process. They need to understand and feel like they have the power to make the changes themselves to make their situation better, more safe. They need to be able to use that information to empower our decision makers about their comprehensive risk solutions as well. The active teaching involves helping people with the learning process, and the goal is to help individuals to take that information that they're getting and learn it and then apply it, and then be able to make the necessary changes in their daily lives to prevent the fires, injuries, and property loss. So if they take that information, but they don't do anything with it, it doesn't do any good. They need to be able to take the information and make the changes for it to be a successful program. And they need to see, again, how that applies to them, why it applies to them, and see what they need to do to make those changes. And we can help them do that. So beyond, there's educating the community, but I think there's two parts to the education process. Educating the community is one part that's really important, but also beyond education for the community is education within each of our agencies. Before change can be expected in the community, agencies should have the policies and programs that reflect a commitment to risk reduction. These policies, programs, and attitudes about risk reduction must come from all levels. In order to foster a positive atmosphere around risk reduction efforts within an organization, those who embrace and contribute to the successes of risk reduction initiatives must be acknowledged. I think that's really important, to acknowledge those who are willing to get involved and help make changes within an organization to promote community risk reduction. I think it's really good in order to foster the culture within an agency and to have supportive risk reduction efforts and promote positive organizational attitudes. And I think that's really important to come from the top down. If there isn't buy-in from the top, then it's going to be really hard for people to buy in underneath that and want to promote community risk reduction. I think it's important to provide education to all personnel about what risk reduction is and why it's important. Help personnel to see why it should be important to them and what the buy-in is for them. Why should they get involved? Why would they want to do and help out with our initiatives? So there's less fires, less injuries, less property loss. And that's within the community. And I think someone alluded to this earlier. There's not always buy-in from all of personnel because there's a thought out there that maybe this would take away their jobs. If there aren't fires to go on, what are we going to do? If there aren't injuries, what are we going to do? But that's just not true. There's always going to be fires, no matter what we do to prevent them. There are always still going to be some fires that occur, and injuries and accidents. We can lessen those, which is our goal, but we're never going to prevent them 100%. And that's just, I think, one of those things out there that isn't true, that frame of mind. But our goal is to have a safer environment for our community, and that's what we want. And instead of being a reactionary agency, I think our goal should be to also a focus on prevention, and that can not only be done through the community, but also educating those within our agencies. So I think it's kind of education is a two-pronged approach, and both are very important to the education process.
Sasha, you said one word in there that really grabbed my attention. That's empowerment. I think education works best when it comes from within the community as opposed to being given to or delivered to the community. I think of one great example here in Colorado is the community of Hermosa, just north of Durango. When they had their big wildfire, the 416 fire a couple of years ago, they had 0 homes lost to that wildfire that came right through their neighborhood. And that's because they took a proactive approach that they themselves started, and they were empowered to go ahead and educate all of their residents on how to mitigate that wildfire potential before there was a fire. And I think some of the great programs that are out there that do this are like Ready, Set, Go, Firewise, Fire Adapted Communities that really empower the people within the community to educate themselves and their neighbors, as opposed to someone from the government here to help, and they're coming in and kind of viewed as an outsider giving this message. Are there any programs that work in a more urban environment than those rural environments? Because while wildfire potentially can affect anybody, it's less of a threat within our urban and suburban communities than it is within the wildland urban interface.
I think a program that I've heard a lot of good things about is Sound the Alarm within an urban community. And I think that we don't use it at my department actually, but I've just heard a lot of great things on that program. I've heard a lot of different departments do, they have smoke alarm programs where they will go into residents and different neighborhoods. They'll do their assessment, see what neighborhoods really are struggling with fires or older homes and people not paying attention to how old their alarms are. And they will go in and do blitzes in those targeted areas to help those individuals get their alarms, their batteries changed, or change out their alarms completely. I've heard a lot of successes about programs like that as well.
All right, thank you. The other thing you mentioned is the fire service is our own community as well, and this model of community risk reduction works both for the public but also for our own internal public responder safety community. And I just want to touch on that a lot of departments now participate in peer support programs as well as more traditional safety programs that help prevent and mitigate incidents within our community. Thank you, Sasha.
Thank you.
The next engineering strategy we're going to talk about is engineering. And this comes up next because part of my background is occupational safety. And we always look for an engineering solution before we look for a behavioral solution. And that comes right down to engineering. And I'm going to ask Stephen, the fire marshal from Arvada Fire and president of the Fire Marshals Association, to talk a little bit about engineering as a strategy for reducing risk in our communities. Stephen?
Thank you, Chuck. Everybody this morning's already talked a lot about very great and important aspects of this, and engineering is just another piece of the puzzle. As we had talked about earlier, community risk reduction is a cycle. All aspects, all of the 5 E's are important, and not one is more important than the other. They're all used in almost every situation in varying capacities, but they all serve very important tasks. And through the community risk assessment that Rebecca talked about, you identify those risks. And once those risks are identified, whether that is an existing condition or a concept in the case of new construction, new buildings, new developments, certain risks need to be mitigated, and engineering solutions may be available. Often, engineering incorporates new products and technologies to modify the environment to prevent or mitigate the identified risks. Some of the well-known engineering solutions that we all know of are bicycle helmets. It was identified kids, adults falling off their bikes and hurting their heads. Next solution for engineering would be, let's put a helmet on and protect that head. Another one would be seat belts. We had thousands of car accidents every year and multiple people dying in those. And once we put seat belts in cars, that risk has been reduced. It doesn't necessarily completely eliminate the problem, but it does reduce that risk. In the modern era, fire sprinkler systems in newly constructed buildings, depending on occupancy type and occupancy load, sprinkler systems and fire alarm systems are being installed to, they don't necessarily prevent any of those risks out there to fire, but they will reduce the impact of those fires if they do occur. Some of the other more prevention aspects of an engineering solution would be smart burners. We see numerous cooking and kitchen fires in every jurisdiction throughout the United States. And with the implementation of these new smart burners, not allowing it to get to a high enough temperature in order to start a fire is reducing a risk and preventing it from even happening. And there are many forms of engineering, from the aforementioned new products and technologies to building and fire codes, and even modifying an individual's behavior. As we have all discussed, CRR is the 5 E's, and they don't individually live within a bubble. Engineering solutions, I don't believe, will be very successful unless people are properly educated. Throughout that education process, it has to be explained to an individual why this is important, what it will do for them in the future. Some of those, as we'll talk about later in economic incentives, is just that the introduction of some engineering solution, although it may cost money on the front end, it can save you significant amount of money in the long run. Additionally, what we'll talk about here next is the enforcement of codes and ordinances. If that's not done, then these engineering solutions may not be successful. And to wrap up, all of the engineering solutions that we have, is all of this is done in order to reduce the number of emergency responses where we can reduce or prevent them, and ensuring that our emergency responders are available for the risks that we cannot completely reduce or eliminate.
Thank you, Stephen. And you kind of brought up a good point that a lot of these engineering solutions are invisible on an everyday basis to most people. They're done before the building is built. They're done before the vehicle rolls off the assembly line, and they don't necessarily see them. And they're not going to know if they're necessarily missing. So that's where enforcement comes in. And how does that play a part as a strategy for reducing risk?
Yeah, enforcement is an important piece of the puzzle here. But I personally believe that enforcement is the last proactive option to reduce risk before the reactionary E of emergency response comes in. Many people see that inspections are enforcement. Rather, I see it differently and take a different approach, that inspections should be educational. We should be going in there and identifying those risks, talking to the building owners, the building occupants, the property managers, and explaining to them when we find a violation, what it is, why it's important, and the best ways to mitigate that, going back to the behavioral and or engineering solutions to it. And if people can understand the how and the why, there is a longer term positive effect that if we can go out there and educate them, they will hopefully retain that information and not repeat the same actions over and over, of continuing whatever dangerous or risky situations that they're implementing within their occupancies. Once they have that awareness, it's beneficial for everybody. Maybe they spread the word throughout their individual groups. And one good example of that would be there's various property management groups out there, and I think of apartment complexes. If I go out and I do an inspection, identify a risk and a violation, and I talk to them about it, hopefully they go back to their greater community and spread that word. And it wouldn't just be a local solution. It can be a broader solution. And now I indicated that, we try and take inspections as an educational task, but there are times where enforcement is needed. And enforcement comes in when the positive aspect of corrective action does not take place. And in those cases, we need to lean on our local ordinances and leverage them to ensure that the risks are mitigated and people are safe. And again, I can't stress enough that community risk reduction is a system, in that one E cannot be successful without the others. And enforcement falls right into that category, that all the other 4 E's play into the enforcement aspect of community risk reduction.
Yeah, and Stephen, you bring up a great point that no E strategy works by itself. You have to incorporate as many of them in any attempt to reduce risk as you can. Enforcement doesn't work if you don't first do the engineering to figure out what safety features need to be added or created to make something safer for the community. And if you don't first educate the property owners or the homeowners, they're not going to know what to do that needs to be enforced. And so that kind of brings us to our next point, and that is economic incentives. They go hand in hand with enforcement, and that enforcement is especially if you get a ticket, a kind of negative economic incentive, but there are different economic incentives that apply to property owners and tenants and homeowners across the board. Rebecca, can you tell us a little bit more about economic incentives as it applies to reducing risk in our communities?
I would love to, Chuck. This is something that I think departments and state, everybody has a way of creating economic incentives that are relevant to their area. So for Windsor Severance Fire Rescue, we came up with something called our Home Safety Project. And it's really our biggest way that we are able to do a grassroots prevention program, because we are providing a multitude of different economic incentives for everybody inside of our district. Part of our home safety program is whole home safety, and using that community risk assessment that I was talking about earlier, we were able to determine what a lot of these preventable risks in our homes are. Namely falls from senior citizens, carbon monoxide alarms, smoke alarms. And our district is unique because we are both urban and rural. And we cover 110 square miles with 3 fire stations. And so it's a very diverse area. And we were able to identify a couple different areas inside our community risk assessment that we could use as part of this home safety project program to create economic incentives. One of them was our smoke and carbon monoxide program. So we started and we say, let us come out to your home and we will do a home safety assessment. So residents sign up for a free home safety assessment, and we come out and we're not only checking their smoke alarms and their carbon monoxide alarms, but we're also checking rugs. We're looking in their bathroom, and this is where the engineering part that Stephen was just talking about comes into play too. We talk about the engineering. Maybe they need a grab bar in their shower if they're older and have suffered from falls and stuff like that. But we use that as our way to get into their home, to say we have this free home safety program that we can, come out and look at your house for you. And then we provide the objects that we're able to at no cost to our residents. Not all departments are able to do that. I am super duper lucky that I have a department that supports community risk reduction so well, because we are able to provide, and I mean, also working with other groups like American Red Cross and Operation Save a Life, and with KIDA and stuff like that. I have a huge supply of both carbon monoxide and smoke alarms that I am able to go into residences and replace if they're expired or if they're chirping. One of the things that we determined in our community risk assessment is for our rural addresses, there was a problem with response times taking just fractionally a little bit longer because the street numbers. We have so many county roads, and lots of them don't show up on Google Maps, that it could take us 30 seconds, maybe 60 seconds longer to locate a home because it didn't have the street numbers. And we were able to see that as part of our community risk assessment. So our economic incentive for that, for coming out and saying, hey, let us check your home, is also we provide reflective address signs for our rural residents. So now we go out, we create it on site, we install it where it is nice and visible, so that, and this goes with the emergency response, this gets a lot of the E's together, which is why I love this program, because then it cuts down our emergency response time, because now we have this 18-inch reflective address sign that gives their street number, so that when we're going down County Road 21, we can locate their house more easily. Plus, then we put it into our Community Connect program that we have, and we're able to really see all these pieces together, these economic incentives. We're saying, hey, let us help make you safer in our community. We can provide this, we can provide this. We'll even cut down the response times by making sure that we can tell where your house is. We like the tagline of, if we can't find you, we can't help you. And so we really use all those different parts to bring in these economic incentives. And it goes both ways. We have a very large senior community, and we respond to a lot of calls for lift assists. And we got the idea from another department here in Colorado who has an amazing senior program. I'm just going to say Colorado Springs. They're amazing. They have such a great program for their senior citizens. And they went and they gave report cards to the different senior care facilities to say, this is how many times we've responded for this, and this is what you're supposed to be doing. And they were able to even show the money part of that economic incentive to say, this is what it costs, for us to come out. This is what it costs for your staff to do this. If we can't get it to be, this level, and we're still having to come out and respond, then and this is where the enforcement comes in. This is why all the E's work so well together, because this is your economic incentive to not call us for lift assists. We want to keep doing it. We want to keep helping. But if it gets to be too high, then they implemented a program where the senior residences, resident facilities would have to start paying a surcharge anytime they came out for a lift assist without any underlying medical conditions. So really, it's just finding those areas that we can prevent something from happening. It's all about that prevention. And then saying, if you let us help you help become a safer community, we can provide these economic incentives, these smoke alarms, carbon monoxide alarms, grab bars. We can, make sure that we're still responding to help lift up your seniors in your facilities, but let's make sure that, it's not a waste of everybody's resources to do that.
All right. Stephen, you had something to add to that.
Yeah, and as Rebecca was talking about all these home safety things that can be done at little to no cost, and when Chief Morgan was talking at the beginning of this about America burning and the impact of fire, the impact that fire has on individuals is substantial. And when we look at the vast majority of the fires that we see in the United States are in single family dwellings. There's a lot of education, but most importantly, the economic incentives of installing residential sprinklers within single family dwellings is probably one of the dollar for dollar most important economic incentives that can be pushed in any community. And the average fire loss, at least here in my jurisdiction, we're looking between $60,000 and $70,000 in loss, and that doesn't account for lost time at work, and sentimental items that can't be replaced. So when you're looking at a loss of $60,000 to $70,000, the economic incentive to install a residential sprinkler system at the cost of $2,000 to $5,000 to depending on the size of the house, $8,000, that's a significant impact that can have on an individual family. That the economic incentive of that just isn't as widely known as it should be.
Yeah, I've seen several studies about the cost versus benefit for home fire sprinklers, and a lot of people really need to look into that more, because in the long run you save a lot of money, and just preventing one home fire will save your house, but it'll save you a lot and your insurance company a lot of money down the road. So there are definitely economic incentives for home fire sprinklers, and I think everyone should take a look into that a little bit more. We're going to move on to Brad. Brad, you are a chief of a fire department up in our mountain communities, Granby, and you recently had a large wildfire come through your district.
We did.
Yeah, for those of you who don't know, these troublesome fire rolled right through the Granby Fire Protection Districts on the north side of your district. And I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit how emergency response plays into reducing risk in our communities. We've heard Stephen say it's sort of the last resort strategy, and that's true, and that we're responding to things after they happen. But how does it really play into that risk reduction?
Yeah, I tend to look at it less like the last resort and more like the safety net. Emergency response, I think, is where quite a few of us, most of us in our industry started out. And, at some point, as you respond to a bunch of calls and move up the ranks a little bit, it just kind of hits you on the head that a lot of what we're dealing with in the field, we can deal with ahead of time in a non-emergent situation and make corrections and make it safer for our folks to go out and work. And so, yeah, there's a lot you can do. And just like Stephen said, this is just one of the E's. It's got to be well connected to the other E's. Emergency response has to be tied in with enforcement and engineering and education. Again, I look at the response. There's internal risk reduction we can do, but certainly when you talk community risk reduction, that's partnering with the community to get things done and make it safer for them. And so whether it's a good, for instance, we just went through this, a good evacuation plan that has a good community education component actually in the long run makes it safer for our responders to get in and do their work in the middle of a wildland fire, because we had a successful evacuation of, county roads and communities back there. So, again, there's some internal stuff. We like to monitor changes in response needs. It was already kind of brought up, good quality data. What are we seeing? What are we dealing with? And, kind of back to the wildland thing, here in the early 2000s, we had a pine beetle epidemic come through, and it wasn't too many skate burn piles in that we decided, hey, we got to make some changes to our training program and to even to working with the county to come up with some enforcement strategies as far as, when do we do pile burning and what should pile burning look like? And, let's encourage the community and educate them on how to do this correctly so that we're not out there chasing, escape pile burns in July and August when we don't want to do that. So, other things we kind of watch are, we work with our towns in the county on community growth and where it's going, and we can turn around and take that. If we've got a lot of multifamily units coming in, like we do now, we look at the equipment we've got, and we look at the training we're doing, and we try to get ahead of the curve. And again, gear ourselves and our folks to handle those issues in the coming years. We try to monitor gaps internally. Do we have resource limitations? Are we going to have a 200,000 acre wildland fire that we've got 35 firefighters to deal with? Well, that's not going to be enough. How do we protect multiple subdivisions in a fire, and how can we bolster, response and resources? Can we work with not just our local partners, but some regional partners and put some mutual aid agreements in place? And, mechanisms for activating resources, things like that. As you look at partnering with community, it goes both ways too. Our response group, they're out there doing things in the middle of the night and seeing different issues and stuff, and can they highlight some things for our community risk reduction folks and say, hey, we need to get some education out on this. What information do they find? A good example for us is we've got one of the trends we're seeing is in the mountain areas is short-term rentals, and we see a single-family home that does not have a lot of regulation once the initial permit is issued and closed out. It doesn't get a regular inspection and stuff, but now all of a sudden you've got somebody new staying there a couple of times a week, and what we see is maintenance goes down as use goes up, and we've got one of our assistant chiefs does community risk reduction for us, and we start seeing, hey, we've had like 3 barbecue grill fires because when the cleaners come in and clean the house between occupants, they clean the house, not the barbecue grill. So what can we do to start educating our short-term rental owners on, hey, you got to make sure those barbecue grills are cleaned out as well, and get that information out. So, it's that response is just like you guys said, it's we start our career thinking it's the end all be all, but really it's just a part of this whole thing. And if we're not connected incorrectly into, engineering and into enforcement, we put a lot of stress on our responders is I guess the way I look at it.
Yeah. And thank you, Brad. To bring us full circle, I'm reminded that all of effective community risk reduction is based on quality data. So how do your responders help ensure that we get quality data to work with as we evaluate what we've done and make plans for what we're going to do going forward?
I think it's easy to come back and, a couple things. We try to make sure the information we're getting into our records management system is good and accurate, and we're not calling we're not calling a false alarm. It's something that got paged out as a something gets paged out. We'll go back to the barbecue grill, right? Neighbor calls it in as a big fire and smoke and all this showing, and it turns out it's a barbecue grill. So just making sure that data gets put in correctly into our records management system, so that as we look back on the year and the previous couple of years and look for those trends, we've got accurate information. But I also think it's conversations in the office. Hey, or maybe an officer meeting. Hey, we're seeing this. We're dealing with this. What can we do about it? And just like I said, those conversations with the folks that are doing the public education and the enforcement. And we try also to, engage our folks. We're a combination agency. We've got a few paid folks, but we've got a lot of volunteers, and we offer up that opportunity for them to come out on business inspections or, meet with homeowners to talk about mitigation, things like that, and just try to get that cross training and open their eyes up to the conversations we're having. But at the same time, those folks that are talking with homeowners about mitigation develop some real stories that they can tell these homeowners. Hey, this is where we have had success. You need to go just a little further. You need to trim a little bit higher on your trees, things like that.
Great, thank you. Rebecca, you had something to add.
I did. When he mentioned quality data again, I'm a nerd. I love numbers and stuff like that. And this illustrates one of the reasons why that's so important. So for our district, we had another grass fire, another hay fire, and talking with our officers in our group chat, I said, well, isn't this like the 3rd or 4th? And our business analyst pulled up our information. She goes, no, this is only the 2nd one. And one of the battalion chiefs jumps in and he goes, no, I can guarantee you this is the 3rd one that B Shift has fought this year. She's like, what? And so we went back and we noticed that not every lieutenant or line firefighter was putting it in with the right code. So we were having vegetation fire, hay fire, grass fire, wildfire. They were all in. We ended up realizing that we had five hay type fires that year, even though according to our data, it hadn't been logged that way. And so that's where we had to go. And we've spent a lot of time over the last year going over our in-first coding and stuff with our department and everybody who fills out their incident reports, so that we're making sure that it's consistent, so that we do have that data, that quality data, to show this is what we're responding to. This is how we can mitigate it. And so that's why I love every time somebody says quality data, my heart just goes, yes, because that's something that we had to learn in our department as well, that even though we thought, and that's why the battalion chief, no, I know that we've done this. They're like, well, the data doesn't show that. That's why we've really learned that we need to push for that quality data, learning what it is, coding it right, so that emergency response, mitigation, all that stuff all works together when we have the correct information.
Great. Brad, what else?
Yeah, just kind of following that up. I think you got to look at the data you have, and you got to really gut check it. Does it make sense with what we're seeing out there? And if it makes sense, great. If it doesn't make sense, you got to dig a little deeper and see what's going on. And maybe the data is accurate, and we just have a misconception of what we're seeing. Again, you got different shifts, different. Sometimes I get staff guys looking at stuff. Sometimes I get volunteers looking at stuff. And if they don't get a chance to cross paths and compare notes, sometimes we're missing part of the story out in the field. So absolutely, you just got to gut check the data all the way through.
So it sounds like having a clear SOG, SOP for data entry would really help with acquiring that quality data to do your initial community risk assessment, as well as follow-up monitoring. Chris Burnett rejoined us. He had a computer issue. So I want to follow up with the question I asked earlier on economic incentives. And Chris, how can small rural volunteer fire departments leverage economic incentives to take the most advantage of the time they have with their volunteers? And how can organizations like Fire Safe Colorado and Vision 2020 assist them with that?
Yeah, thanks, Chuck. And my apologies to everybody for my technical difficulty there. But I appreciate you asking that question. I think our small rural communities, the economic incentive might be one of the most important strategies to implement when we're working with our smaller communities. When you get into a community like that and the community members are relying on just a couple of key large businesses or several small businesses, any impact to the economics of that community can be devastating. And so I want to get a little bit away from fires for an example and use our current pandemic as an example. And hopefully I'm not treading too much on something that's politically charged. But I want to point out that I think we all recognize that there's been economic repercussions to how we're currently handling the pandemic. And so utilizing that and helping the folks in our community to recognize that if we can get through this pandemic as quickly as possible and get our businesses back on track quickly, there's a lot of economic incentive there to follow the guidance and really get people back up and running. And so that's one way that we've used it in our community is to help our small businesses and our community members recognize that, if we can get on top of this current pandemic and get things up and running again, then we can get our community back to a good state. So, the nice thing about having a statewide initiative like Fire Safe Colorado or Vision 2020 nationwide is that you're really able to leverage the strength of all the communities. So it's no longer just a single community trying to handle the risks in their own location. We can start to use, we've talked an awful lot about partnerships today and community involvement and how there's so many pieces of the puzzle. And so if we can start to recognize that we're part of a greater community, then maybe these things won't impact us so greatly if we're able to leverage that work and work together to pull together ideas, initiatives, resources. And that's really what these larger initiatives are all about. I hope that answered your question, Chuck.
It did. Thank you, Chris. We only have a couple minutes left, so Director Morgan, you started this conversation by talking about America Burning. Do you have any final thoughts as we get ready to close out this podcast?
Yeah, thanks, Chuck. I think this has been a great conversation. Really appreciate it. I think it's been said multiple times on here, data, and I don't think you can strive that or drive that point home more. I mean, as I sit there and when I go to the Capitol, I go to the legislature, everything is data driven. And I also want to throw another concept out there that I think it's important has been alluded to. I mean, if you're going to be a successful organization, that means from the top down and the bottom up, you have to have a shared common vision of what the mission, the vision, the values, and what it's really all about. And I think, when you think about outcome decision making or outcome based decision making, a lot of times people don't really know what that means. And I would tell people, that are listening to this is that, fire departments don't add fire trucks or firefighters or programs, or they don't add that stuff for the sake of adding programs. They add those things based upon outcomes. And until we get that into our heads, that data drives what's going on, and then formulating plans to change the outcomes is what our whole industry is driven by. And this community risk reduction model that all of you have been talking about is really how do you execute that to change and have outcome-based decisions that prove the value of the service that we provide. It's also been talked about a lot on here, our division, we've been having a lot of conversations about it, is when you talk about it, it's about changing the likelihood or severity of an event when it occurs. These events are going to occur, and what are we doing to lessen the likelihood or the severity of that event when it occurs? And again, I've always, appreciate these types of forums. I learn more and these things that kind of fires that passion in my heart about what this business is really about. And my hat's off to all the work that all of you do to keep everybody safe, here at, in your communities and across the state of Colorado. So I just appreciate the opportunity, Chuck.
Thank you, Director Morgan. Does anybody else have any other final thoughts before we close out? If not, I want to thank Chief Brad White from Grand Fire. I want to thank Sasha Story from North Metro, Rebecca Clark from Windsor Severance Fire, Stephen Parker from Arvada Fire, Chris Brunette from DFPC, and of course, Director Morgan from DFPC for joining us this morning to talk about community risk reduction. For more information on CRR Week, please go online to crrweek.org. For more information on the Colorado Risk Reduction Network, please go visit www.coriskreduction.com. For more information about the Fire Marshals Association of Colorado, please visit fmac-co.wildapricot.org. And of course, for more information about Fire Safe Colorado, please visit firesafecolorado.com.